Welcome, everyone. This is Glenda Dawson. You're watching Glenda's Dragon's Den. And Haleigh couldn't be here today, but she sends her greetings. She says hello, and she'll probably see you guys next week. Now, today we have a phenomenal guest, Tina Erwin, who is known as a ghost helper. One of the things that she's known for, but well, you know what? Let her tell you all about herself. That's the best way, isn't it? Hi, Tina. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I love your energy. I love your stories. I love your experiences, I should say. Tell the audience how you got to here and how you got that name.
Well, I think I'm like a lot of people who started out as a little kid and didn't know you were psychic because you didn't know everybody can't do the same things you can do or see what you can see because that's your norm. It's not everybody else's norm, but as you're a little kid, that's all you know. But I gotta say, my personal psychic ability didn't really take off till I met my husband. And I met him my very first day at my very first duty station when I joined the Navy. And I was an ensign in the Navy in 1973, which seems like an eternity ago. So it tells you I'm truly ancient. And I met the love of my life on that day, and we were, still together. Uh, and I discovered that the Navy was a great schoolhouse. I worked for the submarine force for 20 years. Some of the most remarkably brilliant and intuitive men. I mean, if you're deliberately going to submerge your ship, you had better feel the ship. You had better get a sense of your crew. You better feel the energy in that rounded hull all the way.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to over the years. I mean, it's not like I'm advertising I have any psychic ability. You're in the Navy, for heaven's sake.
Right.
Guys would, in those private moments, they tell you the things that they felt or they tell you the things that they sensed. And so I began to develop this understanding that everyone's psychic. It's nothing, it's like we all love music.
Right.
I'm not a musician.
Right.
But people who are really, really good at it, you certainly give them credit for having that skill and ability.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed the Navy because it's a schoolhouse of human nature and understanding that if people have a feeling about something, you really need to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And when they warn you or they tell you, I watch the best commanding officers pay attention to the crew.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in the uh, 90s, there was a movie came out called Hunt for Red October.
Mm-hmm.
And my command was part of the filming. Several of my crew members were in that film.
Ooh.
And in the film, they talk about a sonarman named Jonesy who had a feeling about what he was seeing and sensing. In that film, the captain of that fast attack submarine, the Dallas, which was actually the La Jolla, but anyway, the Dallas listened to his crew member and trusted him. And that brings me to another element of psychic ability. And that is one of the hardest things is if you have an ability that's so esoteric, you have to learn to trust yourself. You have to have a confidence in yourself that, yes, I believe this is real. Yes, I believe something could be happening or I'm sensing something. Or you're in a place that's haunted and it's haunted, believe yourself, and then use the tools. And I put out a whole bunch of books, but my 9th book is Psychic Children, Psychic People, which I happen to have right here.
Oh, nice.
The key to understanding and protecting intuitives.
Mm-hmm.
Because, people say burn a little sage, which unfortunately is pretty worthless. And there are other tools that you can use that are far more powerful. and accepting that there are things that happen on the other side that you either need to learn how to deal with and not be afraid of it, because what you fear the most you attract. If you
Mm-hmm.
courage, you might have a better opportunity to deal with something. So, getting back to the Navy, I retired at the commander level. I've been all over the world. People are pretty much the same no matter what country you're in. I've been about 27 of them. And if you have psychic ability, you're in really good company, because there's some really wonderful people out there who get a sense of something and they listen and they pay attention and then they act accordingly. And those people save lives.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit about my background. I do love writing, and I love sharing the information that I've gleaned so that people are empowered. That's why I wrote the 8th book, was the Crossing Over Prayer book.
Okay.
Because if you have a haunted house, you shouldn't have to pay a medium to remove the ghost. If your grandmother dies, you should be able to cross her over yourself in the privacy of your own home using the power of prayer and your
Mm-hmm.
positive intention, because this does work. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit kind of a coconut shell about my life and some of the things I've had the opportunity to do. And I love sharing information so that people can understand they don't have to be afraid of this. They can meet it head on and build their life where they know what to do with these abilities or
Mm-hmm.
these things they're sensing.
Very good. Yes, I myself as a medium, as I was growing up, the same way I was seeing things, sensing things, talking to things, and I always thought it was normal.
That's
I
right.
never knew different, until then I was starting to talk about it, and my mother's like, "Shh, don't talk about it. Just talk to me about it. Not everybody can do that, and not everybody senses." And I'm like, okay. I'm like, wait, nobody. So when I talk to the archangels, not everybody talks to the archangels. What do you mean? I thought everybody did. So it happens. It happens, and I'm we are very blessed to have been able to see the change. Now it is talked about. It's out there. It's not so taboo to talk about being a medium or a psychic or seeing things or seeing ghosts in your house or anything like that. Where before you probably would have been sent away to the patty room with a nice little jacket that gives you a nice hug.
Exactly. And yet, if you're open, you'd be surprised. No, you wouldn't be surprised. You do know how many people will take you aside and say, well, I can talk to you. I can't talk to anybody else about this.
Yes, yes,
There's a whole population of these people out there.
hmm
It's
hmm
exciting.
it is. It is. It's good though that they're finally starting to be willing to take that chance and talk to someone about it.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, in the Navy, when you were there, were you, how did you use your gifts to help you and your crew members or your mates?
I learned how to listen on another level. I didn't reveal what I could do. The longer I
Mm-hmm.
was in the Navy, the more psychic ability began to manifest. And
Okay.
I think I'm not unusual with a lot of people. You can do this one day, and then, tomorrow you can do something else. And you don't even begin to understand all the different things that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're learning to deal with it sort of privately. I think I freaked my husband out an awful lot as you can to develop. And but what I used for my crew was the
Mm-hmm.
ability to listen on another level. Someone's telling me something, but I think there's more to it. Or I began to identify or listen to their voice or listen to their frequency or understand that this person's going to be a real problem,
Mm-hmm.
or this person is so much sicker than we have any idea. As an example, I had a crew member check in. He was an engineman, And he had worked for the surface. He worked on an aircraft carrier, which is unusual for him to come to work for us. I was executive officer for a submarine training facility, and we did really advanced submarine training and firefighting and all this classified stuff. So I'm talking to him and I'm looking at his medical record, and I realized that this man had a collapsed lung.
Mm.
Not because I had some psychic ability, because it said in his medical record that he had a collapsed lung.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it doesn't say it was ever inflated. He said, no, ma'am, it weren't. I had to do my PT with a collapsed lung. And if I did not, they got real mad at me. And I was beside myself because this man had no advocate.
Right.
And I realized that no one had ever cared enough about him. So was that psychic ability, or was that just human compassion?
Mm-hmm.
I demanded that the squadron doctor get a full workup on this guy. And I said, before he went down to the squadron doctor, I said, is there anything else? He says, yes, ma'am. This spot right here, which was his diaphragm, it's cold. It's cold all the time. And I don't feel right. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how can I possibly, certify you as an instructor when you can't possibly give the Navy your best, and the Navy hasn't given you the best care? So we did get his lung inflated, and we figured out he had no circulation to his diaphragm, and he was eventually fully healed and became a very good instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And so by listening and not just rubber stamping,
Right.
really listening, and I think sometimes that's just a factor of being sometimes more female than some things. The man got more help. And I did have a crew member who was a lieutenant who worked for me, and he was a big blonde Texan. And he and I were designing equipment that was protecting submarines from terrorist attack.
Okay.
He got orders to a submarine out of Yokosuka, Japan. And he came and he sat down, and he was a good guy. He worked really hard for me. He worked really hard for the fleet. And he said, something terrible is going to happen when I go to this submarine. It's an old diesel submarine.
Mm.
Something terrible is going to happen. You have to get me out of the orders. And the amount of fear on this man's face was terrifying.
Mm.
I could feel it. So
Oof. Giving me chills.
And he said, I used every silver bullet I had to try to get the orders changed, which is an interesting psychic concept. This man could see a future, a potential future coming for himself. A lot of times people with psychic ability see a future for somebody else or another event, but he saw it for himself. And I moved heaven and earth. I could not get this man's orders changed. I talked to everybody I could talk to, and they said, Commander, he's going to go to Japan, and there's just nothing you can do about it. And so I talked to my lieutenant, and I said, I've done everything. And he said, all I know is something's coming. It's going to be bad. I don't know if I'm going to live. I felt terrible. I felt that I couldn't stop this. I believed him to the core of my being. So this guy goes to this diesel submarine. And for those who, don't understand submarines, diesel submarines were used in World War II. And after World War II, several new ones were made. And this one was it was built in the late 50s, 60s. This is an old submarine by the time we're talking the late 80s. And if it wasn't career enhancing to go to a diesel submarine, because submariners today work with fast attacks, and then they also work on ballistic missile submarines. They're those two more sophisticated kinds. So he flew out there, and this is the story that happened, because I don't want to leave people hanging. It's quite the story. One night, the ship is surfaced because you had to snorkel, which meant the ship has to surface and they recirculate the air. It's
Right.
not nuclear submarine. It runs on diesel.
Right.
It has a battery. So they're on the surface. It's a glass, calm sea on a moonless night.
Mm.
And so imagine that this is a submarine, this pencil.
Mm-hmm.
It has a conning tower. And that's the part that sticks up on a submarine.
Right.
And my lieutenant and two other men were in the conning tower, but it was such a calm night. He didn't latch his safety latch in. And so when the rogue wave hit the ship, they didn't see it coming. They didn't hear it coming. So it took this submarine with an open hatch and sent it down to the bottom. So they had the three worst things that can happen to a submarine: 3 men overboard, a fire, and flooding. They managed to get the hatch closed, and the flooding put the fire out. And they didn't even know where they were. They managed to get a message off to naval activities in Yokosuka, Japan, so that they would send search planes for these 3 men.
Right.
And the ship did not go down. They were able to trim the ship, meaning instead of doing this, they brought the ship back into balance.
Right.
Trim the ship, and then they surfaced the ship to assess the damage because they could not re-submerge because they had too much damage. So my lieutenant tells me that he guesses at the 40-foot level he let go. And he didn't think he would ever reach the surface. And the pressure was so great, his eyes were bleeding, his ears were bleeding, his eardrums. And he's in a, quote Homer, a wine dark sea on a moonless night in a navy blue poopy suit. Picture it.
Yep. You can't see a thing.
And he's out there alone, trying to stay afloat hour after hour, hoping the dawn will come. Finally, I mean, you learn a lot about yourself in this incredible crisis. He couldn't see anybody else, but with the waves, you're probably not going to see anybody else. And he had to conserve his energy. He's not yelling.
Right.
So as dawn comes, the first prop plane is sent from Japan. They got it fixed. They knew where the ship roughly went down, so they sent a plane. He hears it coming. Now imagine you're the pilot. You have the giant headset on, the sound of the rotors, the sound of the squawk box. You're literally a little bit deaf.
Yeah.
And he circles the lieutenant, doesn't see him, and leaves. And his heart sank. It just sank right into the floor. And so hours pass. Plane comes back. Actually circles him, still doesn't see him, and leaves. Panic is setting in because he knows if the plane comes one more time, that will be the last time. They won't ever come back. They will give up on him. So finally, the plane comes. It's toward the end of the day. The plane comes back. And he does something that he and I described as a psychic scream. He screamed not with his voice, but with his mind. The pilot heard him screaming over the headset, the propellers, over all that noise. He heard him screaming, "Help me, help me, help me." And he looked down and saw him. And he tilted his wings to let him know that he was seen. And they circled until they brought somebody who could actually, a chopper that could lift him out of the water.
Right.
Propeller planes, they don't hover too well.
Right.
So in the meantime, I'm getting this information that this accident has happened and he's one of the missing men. And I'm
Mm,
thinking, oh my God, oh my gosh, I should have gotten him out of this. And I'm feeling horrible that I didn't. See, I thought he died, that I didn't save him.
right.
And so fine. And I contacted his wife because I didn't want him to be on CNN and she have no idea. So I
Mm-hmm.
actually went to her house to, kind of run interference. He eventually came back to Norfolk, which is where I was. We had a long talk, and he said he knew something bad was going to happen, but he didn't know if he was going to die. The other two men, as it turns out, both the other two men told their families that if they went to that ship, they were going to die there and
Mm.
they would never come back.
Ooh.
So all three men had premonitions.
Yeah.
All three men were psychic. All three men told someone.
Mm-hmm.
I personally found fascinating.
It
My
is.
lieutenant got out of the Navy and became a minister because he had promised God that if he was rescued, he would devote his life to the service of others in
Very
gratitude
good.
for having his life spared. And as I'm listening, and this is such a good man. I celebrate him, and he listened to what he needed to do to be saved,
Mm-hmm.
and he was saved. And so I'm sharing this with your listening audience because it's not the typical psychic story.
Right.
It's a story that millions of people have privately that they don't really tell anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I have other submariners have told me other stories that they could see and feel and know, and they had to find their moral courage in some other instances. I'm sharing this because we don't often talk about how psychic men are, but they
Mm-hmm.
really, really are. They have a feeling. I had one captain tell me, he was a longtime friend. He said, I knew something bad was coming. I knew my navigator was incompetent. I documented it. I told, all of the chain of command that this guy was incompetent. I couldn't stay up 24 hours a day. And I warned them and I warned them. And unfortunately, when they collided with a Russian submarine, even though he had warned them, he was still liable.
Mm-hmm.
He was the captain. So these people are feeling something. They're tapping into it and they're honoring it. And I have in this book on psychic children and psychic people, I have 70 case studies that document the experiences that people have had that they've shared with me over, all these years that let the reader know everyone is a little psychic. And sometimes you're only
Mm.
psychic in a moment you need to save your life. So let
Exactly.
me stop here.
Wow. That just sends chills, because you don't really hear of the armed forces, the Navy, or anything like that, um, about their experiences. So it's nice that you're able to share, um, not to just say, oh no, you're out here, you're a psychic, you're a medium, whatever. But those moments are their guides giving them a heads up, like, mm, try to do this a little differently. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. My husband was captain of an oil rig off the coast of Brazil
Mm.
for about 5 years. After he retired, he went back to sea because he's really good. He's a really, really good mariner. So he's captain of this oil rig, and you're 28 days on and 28 days off.
Right.
And his companion captain was Norwegian, and he told this story. If you're captain of an oil rig, you had better feel the rig. You better
Mm.
feel your crew. You better be able to read the weather. Look at Native Americans. They could all read the weather. They could
Mhm.
read the signs nature gave them. I'm trying to encourage people to tap into that. It's
Mhm.
not woo woo like people say, This is a real energy. When you tap into it, it can be extremely powerful. So this guy is pretty tapped in. So he, my husband, this was before my husband went to the rig. This
Mhm.
Norwegian captain is flying back to Norway. He's flying on an Air France flight, lands in Orlais and changes plane, then he goes on to Norway.
Right.
And so, he's relieved. He takes his taxi to the airport and he has his ticket. And he walks up to the desk and he's walking slower and slower. And he stands at the desk, can't get on the plane, cannot get on that airplane. And he turns around and walks out of the terminal,
Oof.
goes back to the hotel, calls the company and says, there's something wrong. I'll fly out tomorrow. Can you get me a flight? This company was Transocean, and they're a really outstanding company. I can't say enough good things about that company. So the next morning he gets a phone call, and his wife is calling him and saying, where are you? And he said, oh, I don't know what was wrong with me. I was in a trance. I couldn't get on the plane. And she said, oh, thank God. That was Air France flight 447, and they were lost in the Pacific.
Oof.
They lost everybody. 100% of those people died. So it's kind of a different show because we're talking about psychic ability in men, which I think is super.
It is. It is. And, a lot of people say, oh, it's woo woo and it's only women.
It's
No,
not.
we all have those gifts. It's just depending on if we're in tune with them, if it's an emergency, like, your friend getting into the airplane or not. Those are things that they come to warn us, to let us know, hey, it's not your time. We're going to do everything possible to get derail you, give you a different time frame. We always complain when we have a flat tire or when we're running late or the alarm doesn't go off or whatever. They're doing that, so we're delayed, and then we find out there was a major accident, or that could have been us. We could have been the ones dead. We could have been in that accident. So sometimes, I always say you got to be grateful for what you got and what you don't have.
Exactly.
So um, these are very fascinating experiences because, like you said, everybody thinks normally everybody says, "Oh, psychic or medium, they're women," but there's a lot of men that are really embracing their gifts.
Yeah, but
And
they don't understand why.
right.
I have another story if you're open to another.
Yes, please.
I was an ensign and I was living in bachelor officer quarters in New London, Connecticut. And they said there was a submarine hit a mountain. And I talked to this guy who was on the submarine and he came back. And he said, I don't know what happened to me. So this is the story of what happened to this man. There's a place off the Atlantic Ocean on the coast of you have the east coast of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this trough called, it's like this V in the ocean and it runs parallel to the east coast.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the AUTEC, AUTEC. It's called the AUTEC range.
Mm-hmm.
And in this range, they do a lot of submarine testing and they go back and forth. Sometimes they do war games and this submarine was a SSN 637. I'll never forget this. The submarine thought they were running parallel to the east coast, but they were running perpendicular.
Ooh.
So this this lieutenant wakes up because it's his turn to go on watch. And he wakes up 20 minutes early, rushes to where the other guy's standing watching, says, I relieve you. I'll take over officer of the deck. Guy says, you got another 20 minutes. Go back to your rack. Go to sleep. He says, no. I relieve you right now. The guy says, dude, great. I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Lieutenant says, back, left, all back full, left full rudder, meaning he's taking the submarine and he's slowing it down so that when the submarine did hit the wall, it was a glancing blow.
Right.
He saved 130 men.
Wow. Wow.
And of course he was court-martialed because that's the Navy.
Right.
Because he didn't ask anybody's permission.
Right. Right.
He was the karmic hero of the day. That's why I loved the Navy, and I loved listening to these men would tell me all these interesting things that happened to them. I saw that submarine when it was in dry dock, and it looked like someone had punched it in the nose. It looked like that HY, which is high yield steel, was just punched right in.
Wow.
And he was acquitted at his court martial because he took an action. He couldn't explain why he did it.
Mm-hmm.
But it saved everybody's life. Now, the navigator and the captain were also court-martialed because they were not where they thought they were. So whatever fix they got, it wasn't accurate.
Right.
And I'm pointing this out because this man used, just like that, the captain of the oil rig, he had this feeling that was so dynamic and overwhelming. He had to take action.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in so doing, he saved a lot of lives.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you seldom see men talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I wanted to share that because an awful lot of guys shared some very interesting things with me.
And it's good because even, say, for example, my partner, LD, on 9/11, he was going to a meeting and upstate New York, and he actually felt the wave of all those people that died, their soul, their spirit, come through him and cross through him. So he passed out because it was such an overwhelming. It was too overwhelming. Thank God somebody else was driving at that point because it's just going to the same meeting. But it, every once in a while, he's like, I could still kind of feel that wave, and he's very psychic too. But people don't give credit to men. They don't understand that they could see things and they could be 3 steps ahead of you, and you may be, like. Sometimes I'm like, stop, like, because I'm very independent. And so I tell him, no, I'm not taking orders. And he's like, okay, I'm not giving you orders, but this is what's going to happen. And sure enough, it's like, 3 days go by or whatever time goes by, and there it is. So we don't give men enough credit. And unfortunately, society has kept them quiet too about it. It's easier to understand a woman having the gifts. It is harder for a man by society standards to have those gifts. And it's a shame. It really is a shame.
Well, I think that's the value of this show.
Mm-hmm.
Is that we're bringing it up and we are honoring the men who have the courage to say, yeah, I had a bad feeling.
Yeah.
It happened to me, before. It hasn't happened to me since, but in that moment, something told me to, just fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And I think the value of this particular show is encouraging people to pay attention. Look at all these men who did pay attention. They made a difference. It makes a really big difference if you can listen and then respond. It's just huge because there's a ripple effect.
Exactly. Listen to that little inner voice, even that feeling. Sometimes you don't even hear it. You just have a feeling, and you're like, the men with the submarine going over all that, just the feeling. And maybe they heard it, but they are experiencing it as a feeling. which is something, all your senses, right? It
Mm-hmm.
experience all your senses, all your clairs, as mediums call it. But it's
Yeah.
really your senses. And sometimes you just know, and it's not even a feeling. You just know that if you go to the right hand side, something bad is going to happen. But if you go to the left hand side, even it's going to take you 20 minutes longer to get to where you're supposed to go. You arrive there safe. Over this way, you could have end up dead in the hospital, whatever.
Right.
So
Exactly.
yeah, so it's very interesting, and I love the fact that you are incorporated some of these stories into your books.
I did because I think that if people can understand other people are going through things, you're not alone.
Mm,
This book has a part one and a part two. And both parts have a foreword. And they're written by ordinary people
mhm,
who came to me with a problem and we worked through the problem. And I asked them to write the foreword because they're the everyday people like you and me who woke up one day and they have a psychic problem that's so severe they're terrified
mhm,
or they're under some sort of terrible spiritual attack and they don't know what to do about it
mhm,
and they don't think anybody's going to believe them, but these things do happen.
mhm,
So that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. The other one of the other big reasons for this ninth book is that if you have a psychic child, instead of being ashamed or horrified, learn how to help that child.
mhm.
If your child has a food allergy, you do all the things you need to do to make sure that that food allergy is addressed.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
so this really is an emotional thing for your child. And I had a woman in South Carolina with twin psychic 4-year-olds.
Mm,
And she did not know what, I mean, they are seeing ghosts everywhere they went. And she didn't know what to do. And her pastor told her they were the devil's seed. Sweetest little boys. And he says, how does a 4-year-old become the devil's seed? They're just watching cartoons and then they see a ghost. I don't know what to do. And, we worked together for a little while, and all of the tools that I gave her,
mhm,
I incorporated in this book. And one of the main focuses of it was you need to develop a partnership with your children.
mhm,
You're the parent. You must stay in charge as the parent.
mhm,
And if your child sees a ghost, they need to tell you privately, whisper in your ear. You
mhm,
have the crossing over prayer, which is in both these books.
mhm,
Either play it on your phone, because if they're in both these books are on Audible, or say it, write it
mhm,
down and just say it. Cross those people over. And then your son's going to tell you, or your boys are going to tell you when that ghost is gone. And then
mhm.
have a partnership. They have learned spiritual service to, the living and the dead.
Right.
And you are still in charge as the parent.
Mhm,
It's a really important factor for me. I don't ever recommend that anybody hand their child over to a psychic.
mhm,
You be the parent, you be in charge, you learn the tools, and then you apply them with your child
mhm,
so that you're always in charge. And some of the tools are so simple. One of my granddaughters kept saying she would see something. We took a green light bulb. Remember those old fashioned light bulbs with their big green bulbs? They used to have them on
mhm.
and they get hot. You can
Right,
put those you can screw those in a night light.
right.
We put that in a night light in a plug under her crib, and like magic stopped. She never complained again. And the reason that is because the frequency of that green changes the frequency in the room and it
Mhm,
blocks any of these beings from entering the room. And I had recently, someone told me that their toddlers are having night terrors.
Mm.
So what we have been suggesting is there are certain prayers in the Crossing Over prayer book that I have suggested they print them out,
Mm-hmm.
put them in plastic sheets, and put them between the mattresses of the child's bed.
Mm-hmm.
The night terrors just stop like somebody turned a switch.
That's
So
that's something that I do also when I work with the parents. I work with the children and the parents.
mhm.
So together they both learn how to use those tools.
Yeah, you have
You
to be able
know,
to have tools.
we may have different prayers, but it's basically a prayer,
It's a prayer.
and it's still tools, which is what I also work with the parents, and some kids are very psychic, very connected. They didn't turn that switch off, and they see the beings wherever they go, like you said, and they talk about them, and they come to their mothers in the middle of the night screaming and all that other stuff. And you have to empower the child, at the same time be the navigator of that whole process for the parent.
Yes, you do. And when I had a lady in Texas contact me because her 10-year-old granddaughter, she had custody of the children,
Mm-hmm.
was having these things come at her every single night, and she'd get in bed with her grandmother because the mother lost custody
Right.
through problems. And so, and this in this Psychic Kids book, I invited her to bring the souls and send them on a soul train. And, all aboard. And I had her draw a picture of it. So it's in her room. She can see it. And there are angels in her images,
Right.
that the angels are saying, all aboard the soul train. She's a ghost magnet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a goodness, there's a light. We all talk about the light that some
Like,
of these children are displaying.
mm-hmm.
Well, put them on the soul train. And now she knows what to do. She doesn't drive her grandmother nuts getting in bed with her at night.
Mm-hmm.
There's no more screaming. And this child is in charge now. It changed the dynamic of the entire household,
Right.
which is, as far as I'm concerned, you can get a night's sleep. Woohoo! That's a big deal.
Very important if they let you go be and you could actually sleep. Oh,
And so then children are asleep. If your children are sleeping, then they're healthier. They don't get
yeah.
sick. If they're
Right.
not afraid, they're not like this.
Mm-hmm.
They have confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that ripple effect has a long-term positive effect.
Yes. Yes. And they feel empowered, so they could take that energy and continue moving on with it, and into their high school years, into their college years, into their adulthood, which is
Exactly.
what's important. So
Exactly. When you get to understand what's important and you're learning what is spiritual service, especially as a child,
mm-hmm.
I think it makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
Sorry.
oh, that's okay. That tickle is always interesting. So when you started writing those books, what did you get, like a feeling? Did you get a push from your guides? Did you from your team?
In 2003,
Mm-hmm.
my 6-year-old niece sat on the sofa next to my sister and she said, "Mommy, I feel hot." And then she died.
Mm.
And it was such a stunning event for the family. We all went into shock. And my sister said, "Can you remote view her right quick and get her to go back in her body?" That's a request you don't ever forget for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that. And I went into a kind of shock, and she said, "No, I'm done. I'm not going back in the body."
Mm-hmm.
And I could see her with her arm around her older sister in the emergency room. They worked on that kid for 2 hours. She was never coming back. And I watched as no one knew what to say to us. When a child dies, nobody knows what to say because it's everyone's worst horrible nightmare.
Right.
So I wrote The Lightworker's Guide to Healing Grief. And I realized that everybody's grieving something, the loss of a child or a parent, or you lost your job, or your pet died. Maybe that was your family, was you live alone and your pet is your family.
Exactly.
And or you're grieving the loss of your parents' faculties. They don't know you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a book that was designed to help all different kinds of grief, or know what to say or what not to say. And when I wrote that book, it took me quite a while to get that really up and going. But I realized that it was extremely meaningful for people to look at grief a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
There is an aloneness with grief. If your loved one takes their own life, that catastrophic cascade is so horrific that you don't know how to come out of it. And so what you're not realizing is that the ghost of the person who took their own life is so sorry that they did that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're hanging around you. That's why grief, it feels like suicide is contagious.
Mm-hmm.
You can't differentiate between your grief and their grief. And their grief is so overwhelming, it feels like you want to leave too.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote the compassion prayer for suicide.
Okay.
And I've had many parents use that. I had a woman in North Dakota write to me, and she said, my 17-year-old took his own life.
Mm.
And I crossed him over using your compassion prayer for suicide. I could not believe the difference that I felt. I felt lighter, like I could heal. I could do better. And then she said, can you write a prayer that I can send to him every day? I never stopped loving him as a parent. If you really love your children, you never stop the parent's love of that child.
Mm-hmm.
Something that is part of your very soul. So I wrote that prayer, and she says that prayer every night, and it has enabled her to not only mitigate her grief and work through the process of grieving, she shares it with other parents who have gone through this.
Mm-hmm.
I I wrote a prayer for crossing over murderers. And I got a lot of criticism for that. Let them just stay in hell.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is they kind of don't. They can haunt the living.
Mm-hmm.
And they can haunt the people that they murdered.
Yep.
A lady in upper state New York who contacted me, and she said, my father was executed as a murderer. He was a serial killer. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
Family. Can you cross him over? And I said, well, I can do that. It's going to be a whole lot more meaningful if you do it. She said, well, he's really horrible. He keeps telling me the ghost of her father is telling her to murder her 4-year-old daughter.
Oh.
He is unrelenting.
Oh.
So I said, well, here's what you do. Use the crossing over prayer, because I think I hadn't written a prayer for murderers yet. And I said, I want you to say this 3 times, and I want you to really have authority in your voice when you say it. Don't say, please. You're in charge here. This guy's got to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Crossing over prayer. So she did it 3 times, and she played beautiful music, and she raised the frequency of the room. and he was gone. And her 4-year-old looks up and says, "Oh, mommy, the bad man is gone now." She didn't know her daughter
Wow.
was hearing everything.
Wow.
So the power of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And Christ was once asked to write a wonderful prayer, and he wrote the Lord's Prayer. But Christ, what he said to his siblings, because he had a lot of siblings, was the very best prayer is the one that comes from your heart.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book of all kinds of prayers, but you don't have to use those. If you have a prayer that comes from your heart and you're requesting help and crossing your loved one over, that is just as effective.
Mm-hmm.
No one has cornered the market on prayer. And any prayer that comes from your heart is powerful and dynamic.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. No matter what it is, that's for sure. And so that got you to then write the prayer for the
Murderers.
murders.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So I wrote the grief book, and then I had so many ghost stories. I wrote three books on ghost stories from the ghost point of view. There's 3 volumes. And they
Okay.
talk about all different kinds of ghost experiences that people have had. So I tell the view from the homeowner and then tell the view from the ghost. A lot of times the ghost has no idea that homeowner's there. I
Mm-hmm.
do remote viewing, so
Right.
a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're remote viewing back through time, then the stories get really pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Time is not necessarily static. And
Right.
then I wrote several books on karma, and so it's been a busy couple years.
Good for you, and it's good because you're actually doing this as a service, and people can heal even if they can't find the right person to help them. Because sometimes we're looking, but you talk to somebody and they're like, "Yeah, I'm not resonating with what you're saying," and they have
Exactly.
options, and they have options. Um, Now we're kind of slowly coming towards the end, believe it or not, already. But is there any last profound thing that you want to say to the audience, and then we'll talk about how they could contact you.
Thank you for that. I would, if you have psychic ability and you want to learn how to use it in a karmically correct way as much as you possibly can, the Psychic Children, Psychic People book can be really helpful. If you have a ghost and you don't really care whether or not you're psychic, cross that soul over. That soul may not even know you're there. When you cross that soul over, you're going to feel a difference. And that person may not know what to do. They may be confused. They may not know they're dead. I've seen that over and over again. And I'm offering this because it is the compassion that you will want for yourself. If something happened to you and someone brought in an angel in a warm blanket to embrace you and guided you into this glorious light, you can't even begin to imagine your gratitude to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Because they overcame their own fear and they helped you. And that would be my my call to action. If you have psychic ability and you can find a way to be of service to others, I would strongly recommend doing that. It will change your life and it will elevate you. And you never know what doors might be opened when you do that.
Very true. Very true. Wonderfully, wonderfully. Now, people can find you in different ways, like your website. You have a podcast here.
I have the Ghost Helpers podcast, which is available on Amazon. It's free.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can, use that. I have all my books are on Amazon. And if you go to ghosthelpers.com or tinaerwin.com, Erwin with an E,
Mm-hmm.
then you will see these books are there. There are a lot of prayers on the website, and they're absolutely free. If you don't want to have to buy a book just to get the crossing over prayer, just look at the
Right.
website. It is,
Right.
there are several prayers that are there. There are videos there. Just play them, and you can hear me saying them if you don't want to do it.
Right.
It is an opportunity for me to be of service to others.
Hmm. Very good. Very good. So, we truly appreciate you being here. And I love that we started with a different perspective because a lot of people do only think only women or mostly women are the ones that are psychic and mediums. And the fact that you brought in the male perspective is great. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I really am.
Well, thank you.
It's a
I
wonderful
a
thing.
lot of admiration for the men that I worked for and worked with, and the men who worked for me. I had 150 men work for me at any given time.
Mm.
And I really admired all of them. I thought they were really good guys. I had many, senior officers mentor me. They would point things out. So I had some bad days. You can't have a career without some tough days. But overall, I really love the Navy. I love the people I worked with, and I was grateful for the opportunity to be of service to them. So I wanted to share that perspective because I think that it brings balance to the world of psychic ability.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Very
thank
good.
you so much for having me and giving me this remarkable opportunity to share this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And we just want to say thank you to the audience. Remember, like, share, check out Tina's websites. It's all going to be not just on the headings, but it's also going to be in the description. Don't forget to tell her that you saw her here, and then she'll know right away what what you came for. So, again, many blessings. And
Thank
as
you. Blessings.
always, we love you. Bye.